Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Allegations and even more allegations weeks after Donald Trump won the presidency, the outgoing administration and some in the intelligence community and, of course, the mainstream media accuse Russia of hacking the election. But where is the evidence? Two CrossTalk allegations made against Russia. I'm joined by my guest, Joe Lauria in New York. He's an independent journalist. Also in New York, we have DeBar. He's an anti-war activist and host of a daily radio program. And in Tampa, we cross to Scott Rickard. He is a former American intelligence linguist. All right, gentlemen, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Joe, let me go to you first here. The meme known as the Russian hacking of the American election. What we've got now, you have a choice. You can believe Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, or you can believe President Barack Obama, who will be out of a job in about 20 days, and the American intelligence community. I give you a choice. Who do you believe? Go ahead.
Well, there's no evidence presented by the intelligence agencies that Russia was behind this. And that has not stopped, unfortunately, mainstream media from reporting it as if it was absolute truth. They don't even call it alleged hacking for the most part. It's just become accepted that this is what's happened. And I believe it was done initially to try to get the electors to flip their votes to Trump. That didn't work. On Friday, the Congress meets to certify the election. The Senate and Representative can object to Trump. I think this was all about undermining either him being elected ultimately or his presidency. But we have here with the mainstream media, unfortunately, one of the four types of fake news. One is satire, which Onion is always very useful, gets closer to the truth usually than others. We have clickbait, where people, some guy in LA, another one in Eastern Europe, have just did fake stories to get people to sell ads, to click on this thing. You have intelligence agencies apparently writing these stories of disinformation, where you have a lot of truth and then these blatant falsehoods. And with the mainstream media, you have omission. They leave out the other side of the story on international story. They have an agenda, and the agenda is not news. It is not presenting all sides of complex international stories, of competing interests of nations. They present the American point of view only, or the Western point of view, and they completely omit the Easterners, or they explain what Eastern people, Russians, Iranians, Syrians, think. And the American people never get to hear the voices of people in the East, and that dehumanizes them, making it easier, by the way, to go to war against them. So this is just another instance of corporate media, fake news, and in this case, of course, they're blaming, we're putting the emphasis on Trump, but this is very dangerous for Russia as well, and U.S.-Russian relations.
It's dangerous for the whole world here. Don, if I can go to you, I mean, it's not just omission. Just look at the Washington Post. I mean, they're really batting 1,000 over there now. I mean, 3 fake news stories come out recently, and, those people that write those stories, their careers soar because they get the clicks for it. And they're never sorry about it. They're never sorry for misleading and deceiving and playing very, very partisan politics here. And overall, it is about the delegitimization of Trump, but it is delegitimizing the entire American political system in the process. Go ahead, Don.
Well, first of all, just by its operation, it actually, in the minds of millions of people in the country, delegitimizes reality. This narrative is completely decoupled from any factual basis. Look at the discussion, for example, of, these allegations against Russia. They've presented several reports now that supposedly prove it. Not a fact in the whole report. There's a chart that would embarrass Netanyahu with his Roadrunner bomb that he brought to the UN that supposedly shows, the mechanical operation of a hack. And it looks like something that, Wile E. Coyote would buy from Acme to throw at Roadrunner. You have, meanwhile, the architecture of something quite ugly being constructed. In the NDAA, for example, this is the most recent step that's been taken with the U.S. the government's been grappling with this question of quote-unquote foreign propaganda at the Broadcasters Board of Governors level. Now they have this thing that they call the Global Engagement Center, that's a child of the NDAA. It sounds, Global Engagement Center sounds almost like mail-order brides, but in fact, it's like a ministry of truth, George Orwell's type. And if you look at the actual mission statement that's specified in the statute, that's exactly what it is. They're looking at information that comes into the United States, deciding what's true and what's not, and then dealing with it, whether they deal with it in the American press, because those entities controlled by the BBG and by this new group are now allowed to propagandize the American people with their own tax dollars. And so they're going to interpret reality for us. And, the idea of people in Washington interpreting reality is too hilarious for words, really.
It's a sick joke in the new year. Scott, everything we've really said so far on this program is that the mainstream media has failed. And this is why they're taking these actions right now. They're terrified of alternative media. They're terrified of alternative voices because they have lost. People don't believe them anymore. And that's why they want to shut everybody else down. You have the administration going out supporting this. You have a politicized CIA and FBI, which is really, that's terrible in itself here. We shouldn't have those kind of conditions existing in government. And then you have the Republican Party's, members of the Republican Party going against their own head of party, Donald Trump, president-elect. This is the gambit that we're in. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, this is exactly what's been happening in the political system, the media, and the United States government for quite some time. We've had a tremendous amount of propaganda, since the newspapers became an issue in the early 1800s. The Federalist Papers, all the different newspapers were supporting their political agendas. These agendas have been going on, obviously since the early 1900s. If you want to get into the history of it, for God's sakes, Edward Bernays, the father of public relations, basically wrote the book on how to basically control societies with media. And the societies that are being controlled with media, there are underlying agendas. And these underlying agendas are absolutely have failed in this last election. And they were surprised by it. I was surprised by it as well.
Yeah.
It's good to see a failure in the system, and I'm really happy to see that it's being exposed by muckrakers like RT. A lot of the people in the United States say, "Oh, RT is scary. It's propaganda." There's a lot of individuals who actually believe, that this is a true propaganda outlet. When in fact, I try every day to try to get on American media and talk about these types of things and get these types of things exposed in American media. They've covered up Syria. They've covered up, they've covered up everything, in Ukraine. They're obviously covering up what happened in Libya. So this is a tremendous amount of propaganda that's being fed to the American people, and they actually believe it. And I don't think it's because, there are individuals out there that are trying to deceive. It's a confabulation that they actually believe. And when you hear a narrative that isn't consistent to what you've heard on television, unfortunately, it becomes uncomfortable, and most people will shut it out, unfortunately. That's just human nature. So that's what's happened here is we have a society that's been incredibly misguided, incredibly misinformed, and now they've been exposed by thankfully RT, CCTV, Press TV, and individuals like Don and Joe and I that come out and say, hey, wait a second, might want to look over your shoulder. There are a lot of things that you've been misguided about, for well over 100 years in this country.
Joe, I put on Facebook last night a screenshot. I was watching Fox News. And it was that Fox News is the only one that actually says, where's the evidence? And I give them credit for that. But one of the comments below the screen as they were having the conversation about quote unquote Russian hacking, they said Soviet interference. Now, I thought that just spoke volumes, volumes of where the media stands right now. The Soviet Union dissolved 25 years ago last month. It's gone. All right. But apparently, in the minds of the mainstream media, it's still very there. This is really the problem as well. Go ahead, Joe.
Cold War never ended, basically, for those people, unfortunately. Scott mentions the history of journalism in the United States and muckraking, except for a period of that muckraking period of the progressive era in Lincoln Steffens and in the 1970s when we saw Washington Post, a very different newspaper then than it is today, helped bring down Nixon and the intelligence agencies, the dirty tricks that were exposed by Church Committee and other committees. For the most part, American journals have been filled with careerists who live vicariously through the powerful people that they cover, and they ignore the greater power that the press has, which is to cut those powerful people down to size. And until you get the skepticism that we no longer have in the media, they're going to take whatever the CIA of all agencies tells them about Russian hacking and other matters. The CIA, which has lived since 1947 on deception and deceit,
their job.
And meddling in other elections and overthrowing elected governments, the people's attitude in the press and then unfortunately in the public is, well, you don't believe the CIA when they tell us this? I mean,
Of course
it's extraordinary how far we've come from the 1970s. We've lost all skepticism in the media against what government officials say, and therefore we're in a lot of trouble, and these stories can be peddled and believed, unfortunately, because the reporters themselves believe it through their own upbringing and their lack of skepticism.
Let me go to Don before we go to the break here. You know, we just heard about the CIA in overthrowing regimes around the world. You know, it's really interesting, that whole regime paradigm is come home to Washington, D.C. Now they want to overthrow a government in the United States. They have had plenty of practice all around the world, and now they've brought their quote-unquote skills to the American people. How democratic is that? Go ahead, Don.
First of all, I have to admire Trump, or whoever is the person behind Trump's campaign, Kellyanne Conway for sure. Managing just the precise navigation of that campaign to more than 300 electors in the Electoral College, which is the legal mechanism to be elected president. It was a razor-sharp navigation of a minefield that consisted of wall-to-wall media coverage, just basically a carpet bombing of his campaign, information-wise, from its inception, and all the way through every hurdle that was thrown, mechanical, legal, public relations, etc. They navigated it through there.
Don,
the establishment that was assembled.
Gents, I have to jump in here. We have to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on allegations against Russia. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing Russia's alleged role in the U.S. election. Okay, I'd like to go back to Scott in Tampa. You know, this alleged hacking story is fascinating because it has so many different perspectives here. First of all, we have an establishment that can't admit defeat because they certainly never did anything wrong. They had this amazing candidate that inspired people so much. And then you have, you know, somebody like Trump. It doesn't deserve to be president because he isn't like us, okay? He's a deplorable. Also, there is the aim of the current administration, which I've never seen in my life, creating a minefield around the president-elect. I mean, in the most petulant, childish way that is conceivable. And plus is to make sure that Trump is boxed in about his own foreign policy views. Now, he's already mentioned some things that I don't like, but one of them, obviously, I do like, would to have better relations with Russia. That's good for both countries and for the world. But this is part of this stratagem as well, and it's a very dangerous one. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, like Philip Giraldi says, you know, it would be good for the United States and Russia to have good relations. Obviously, there would be some great things that came from that. You know, and as far as the competition, you know, up until about 10 years ago, before the launch of RT and Press TV, you know, there was no nobody could actually beat the American media. There was absolutely no chance of anybody else coming up against them. Now, you know, RT's dominating YouTube. You know, Press TV is getting out there. I see hits coming from all over the world. People are seeing that channel as well. So you've got a real interesting situation that has arisen that has never really been there before. And there's real good competition out there for getting information out. And when it comes to you know, the United States, Rex Tillerson, you know, I would give a sort of a wise warning out to Snowden, Rex Tillerson could actually negotiate easily an extradition of Snowden back to the United States. So this is the kind of relationships, it would make Donald Trump just, a huge hero in many of the organizations around the country, and a hero on the Republican side. Because let's be clear, when you're getting this analysis from the CIA,
yep.
the CIA, the guys at the top, don't really have a serious understanding of the technology. Guys like James Clapper and those types of guys, they're dependent upon the directors of those divisions. And those directors of those divisions also have their own perception of reality. And a lot of these guys absolutely have learned their perception of the reality from their history of Hollywood, looking at films. They don't even understand. They work in such portals in the intelligence community. I know these people personally, and some of them have some very distorted perceptions of reality.
Yeah, it's like Mr. Morrell, we have to start killing Russians and Iranians. Well, that is really sound advice. That's so typical of, the establishment. Just kill people. That's enough. That's a foreign policy. Joe, let me go back to you. I want to stay with U.S.-Russia relations. I mean, this is very key here because we had Dumb and Dumber, or, Lindsey Graham and John McCain were in Kiev on New Year's. I think we have a dumbest in there. I'm sure we all could vote for that one, too. But, his own party is trying to box him in here on a foreign policy initiative. He's not even in the Oval Office yet. Okay, well, this is, again, something I'm really worried about because, and they're going to use this as a litmus test, okay? And so they want to end this presidency, or at least its effectiveness, on day one. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, there are a lot of interests at stake that would be hurt in the United States if Russia and U.S. relations improved. I'm talking about deep state and military industry. And this thing is ratcheted up. Look, terrorism, when the Cold War ended, they moved on to Islamic terrorism. It doesn't seem to be enough. They need both right now. And demonizing Russia and Putin has been extraordinarily profitable for a lot of people in the U.S., and it's helped the media. And they don't want to see what would be a great sigh of relief for the entire region and the whole world if the U.S. and Russia got along. Maybe not for Mr. Snowden, as Scott points out. I think that would be a mistake, but he could want to bring back Snowden the way Obama supposedly got bin Laden. So U.S.-Russian relations, this is the one issue, of course, as you point out, that Trump has been right on, and he hopefully will follow through on that. There's a lot of other things, and his appointments have not been very encouraging.
Yep,
but thank God John Bolton is not Secretary of State. But I think that that we're going to really test the Trump presidency on these Russian-U.S. relations and how they might improve, and that would help a lot of things in Syria, of course, if they team up against Islamic State, in Ukraine if they lessen tensions, along NATO border if he ends those war games and withdraws those troops, and this could really be a great thing, and I think that would be the great achievement that Trump could pull off. But he has so many enemies, as you've pointed out, in the U.S.
Don, I was talking about the waning days of the Obama administration, and I can't help but feel that somehow it's personal. I mean, the perception is, outside of the United States, and maybe among some inside the United States, is that Vladimir Putin has got the better of Barack Obama every single time. And there seems to be some bitterness. I mean, Hillary Clinton said, Putin has a beef against me. I mean, what a way to leave the political stage. I mean, that was so embarrassing. But Obama's doing exactly the same thing. What he's doing, he's creating his entire legacy from the time that Trump was elected. Out of all those 8 years, only a few weeks he's trying to create a legacy. And it really looks like a petulant child. Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, certainly telling 35 families they have to leave the country in 72 days, New Year's weekend.
Including the chef. Including the chef. Including the chef, okay.
Including the chef. But picking up where I left off before the break, that essentially you have this campaign won unexpectedly, and so the foreign policy statements that Trump had made during the campaign suddenly, are threatened to become U.S. foreign policy. And you saw a wall-to-wall response to that again. Now, they've been riding this Russia thing for a few years now, going back even to the war in Georgia, but particularly the coup in Ukraine. And But during the, when the release happened during the DNC of all of these emails of Clinton's and then the stuff from Podesta, they really went into this neo-McCarthyism, and there's a broad section of the American public that's buying into it. Now, the thing that troubles me about that is this. Whenever you have that kind of a public relations campaign, it isn't done for its own sake. It's usually baselined to some action that the government's going to take. And this particular type of action in the public relations sphere is usually baselined to a war at the object of the public relations campaign. Only Russia, unlike Iran too, they tried, unlike Iraq, Libya, and Syria, has many nuclear warheads that they can fire back. And they will fire back. And unfortunately, I'm sitting in New York. I don't want to see that happen.
I'm sitting in Moscow, okay? I'm sitting in Moscow. I'm not happy about that, okay? And I'm sure there's a drone with RT's address on it, okay? No doubt about it in my mind here. Scott, one of the things I think is really interesting is that they keep talking about these hacking, which is probably leaks, but the mainstream media and the political establishment just don't seem very interested in how Podesta lost his emails. And we know that the DNC was hacked or leaked, but there's no investigation of that. No one is interested in that, and they want to go after fantasies and phantoms with, according to what Don said, and he's absolutely right. The country I live in has nuclear weapons, okay? And now it gets really serious when you try to poke the bear like you are. I mean, that's not a wise move. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I mean, this is typical. This is what they refer to as the Ben Franklin effect. It goes both ways. You can either make a friend or make a foe. And obviously, Walt Disney got his start making his cartoons that were very anti-German, and we're seeing just an onslaught of information that is absolutely untrue about Russia. And certainly, I'm one of the Americans that's extremely happy that Podesta's emails were exposed. It had ties to one of your guests that you had on, Brent Podolsky. Now, this individual is a tremendous propagandist for the left wing. He was negotiating with Podesta throughout emails, trying to push around any type of agenda for the left wing, the DNC, like the what do they call it? The MSDNC. I have to give that to Lionel. I heard from him first. I love that. And at the end of the day, this type of propaganda that's coming out of the United States, unfortunately, is nothing new. And what we really need is the kinds of things. Thankfully, like I said, a decade ago, Press TV and RT came out, and just keep growing. And the more you grow, the better you get. And invest in your own think tanks in the United States. I've gave this same recommendation to Iran. You have to invest in these think tanks, and you have to invest in this thought perception game that the Americans just have dominated up until probably the last 2 or 3 years. And now, I remember Clinton sitting in front of Congress saying, we're losing the media war. Well, you know what? You've lost a lot, and then thankfully, because you've been deceiving the Americans for far too long, and it's about time that we come on an even playing field with these individuals that really are nothing more than enlightened despotism, for the United States as citizens. This is not anything that's helping us.
Joe, I'll give Joe the last word on the program here, but the best of all possible worlds would be competition, the marketplace of ideas. But I don't see that in the waning days of the Obama administration, after hours, taking the garbage out, as they say, and signing this Ministry of Truth resolution, this bill here. I mean, they don't want competition. They want to silence opposition. 30 seconds. Joe, go ahead.
Well, the corporate media conglomerates own almost all the major media, but they're losing. They don't have a monopoly on information, as has been pointed out, because of other nations' English language programs and also websites, news websites that are very serious. And they have lost this war, as you're saying, or they're losing it anyway, despite their dominance. I don't think they could stop it. I think they're very reluctant to shut down news operations, although we saw attempts with this prop or not, this absolute McCarthyist thing of the Washington Post.
On that note,
it's a troubling time. We're going to see what's going to happen.
We'll see what happens. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in New York and in Tampa. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, CrossTalk rules.
believes that this will not. Sorry to interrupt. I love your voice.